even though many of the cases in it are familiar to people who know the UFO literature, my intention was to be writing this for the person who didn't know anything. The sort of, the skeptical but curious, intelligent person who, if they wanted to know something about UFOs, would only need one book to read in order to really get the whole picture. And that was my goal in presenting this, and also in providing the absolutely most credible, most factual information that really cannot even be questioned, based on the people that are reporting these things, and allowing them to write their own chapters. We were just talking about John Callahan a moment ago, the high-level FAA official who investigated this case over Alaska. Well, the only thing you're going to read about it in my book is John's chapter, his own chapter. You're going to read about it directly from the head of the FAA Accidents and Investigations Division, who was the man involved with this investigation. So I think, because of that aspect of it as well, the mainstream has taken the book very seriously, and I feel... The questioner is absolutely right that was my purpose in writing the book. And, if you could hand one book to a member of Congress, say, I sort of had this in my mind as I was writing it. If I was able to get a member of Congress to read one book on UFOs that I would want them, to really get across the point to them, what would that book involve? What would it include? And that's sort of what I was trying to bring into this volume.
Well, it's a fascinating read for those who haven't picked it up. I highly recommend it. I agree. It is a definitive book that will give you incredible insight. And I, too, really enjoy the fact that it's not just you writing the words, but those that you've selected as part of this these various investigations, the folks that were the most credible or were in the most authority to be able to say it in their own words and present it from their own point of view. And I think that's a fascinating way of doing it. I don't believe I've ever read a story or a book that goes into that much depth and detail. You'll get snippets or little vignettes, but I appreciate that. That's a really interesting way of doing it. I wanted to ask you, too, a little bit about what your take is on, before we went to break, on the Rendlesham Forest, Bentwaters Woodbridge Air Base incident. I find that as a sort of the watershed event on or at least the most publicized event on a U.S. air base that I know about. I know there's been other incursions, especially in the continental United States, and we won't get into that tonight, but around Minutemen missile bases and what have you. But I believe that this particular incident was incredible and included a deputy base commander and several of the security personnel there. Tell me a little bit about there too, as well.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with you, James. I don't think there's any case that comes close to this one in terms of anything that happened at a military base because of the documentation we have on this case. And it's a very complicated case, so it's hard to sort of give a really short summary of it because it took place over different nights and it involved lots of different people and different events and so on. But just to summarize it as succinctly as I can, there were basically two important events. One of them involved a craft that actually landed and some security policemen that were called out to check it out. And James Penniston actually describes touching the craft, studying it for a lengthy period of time, drew pictures of it, wrote down diagrams of symbols that were on the outside of it. And the next 2 nights later, the deputy base commander, Charles Holt, actually went to the site where this thing had landed prior to his going out and was able to see the marks on the ground that the craft had made. There were abnormal radiation readings. There were branches that had been broken, etc. There's all kinds of physical evidence at the landing site for this event that took place the day earlier and was witnessed by so many people. Lots of other people saw it taking off. And then Colonel Holt himself, with a group of other men, when he was out in the forest, looking at this landing site, he actually ended up seeing these extraordinary UFOs himself. And and there's this famous audio tape that probably many listeners have heard. He had his pocket tape recorder with him, and he actually in real time spoke into his tape recorder and spoke about what he was seeing. And that tape survives to this day. Extraordinary, this kind of reddish object that came around through the trees that looked like a big eye, was able to navigate around the trees. So he described it as definitely being under intelligent control. And then after that, there were these elliptical shaped objects that came overhead, and they shot down these beams of light just feet from where he was standing with a group of other people. I mean, absolutely extraordinary displays by the objects, as well as this landing, make this event absolutely unusual and also make it very, very well documented. The witnesses filed reports, and there's lots of written material about it, and many, many witnesses to the event. So it's extremely well documented. And both Colonel Halt and Sergeant Peniston, who are the two key witnesses to this, have written chapters about it in my book, so you can hear directly from them about it. It's really one of the 10 best cases for sure, ever, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. We've got a caller on the line, area code 973. State your name, where you're from, and what is your question?
Yeah, my name is John. I'm from Hackettstown, New Jersey. I had a question for Leslie. I wanted to get your take, Leslie, on how the media is portraying just the opportunity or the possibility of life outside of Earth and the effect that's having on I hate to call it ufology, but it seems like that's the going term. But it feels like with more people accepting the probability and the high likelihood that life has evolved, whether it's microbial life or intelligent life outside of the Earth, that the possibility seems to be increasing that UFOs could indeed be a real phenomenon that people are seeing, and maybe more people are open to believing that now, since we've proven that the likelihood of life elsewhere is very high.
Yeah, I mean, John, I really, really love that question, because it's something I think about a lot, and I'm always taking note of, the fact that we are every day discovering more and more so-called habitable type planets out there that are circling other suns in our galaxy. So I'm always making that connection in my own mind, and, very interested in kind of moving the UFO issue into the more scientific realm, and somehow finding a place where that kind of exploration of life elsewhere, the scientific exploration of the astrobiology that we're also interested in, that somehow there can be a place for UFOs within that broader picture. And I think we are moving closer to that possibility. I think I mentioned this U.S. News and World Report special issue that's on the newsstands right now, I think is an example of that. Because as I mentioned, it's about the mysteries of space, and it deals with all these issues of exoplanets, and is there life out there, and what is SETI doing, and what kind of life could there be, and how are we going to find it, et cetera, et cetera. And within that context, it deals with the UFO issue. So that I thought that was a really great step towards the kind of thing that you're talking about, and I'm always looking for it and always trying to create it myself too, as best I can, to kind of bring these things together. So I hope we keep moving in that direction.
Yeah,
thank you, John.
That's great. I appreciate that answer. Yeah, I just one quick follow-up, if I could, Leslie.
Sure.
Do you feel like that the kind of opening the door scientifically to these possibilities, do you think that maybe puts a little bit of pressure, or maybe alleviates some of the pressure on government to take a more serious look at the UAP phenomenon?
Well, I mean, I think at this point that's probably not having that effect, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't think, government itself, it depends what you mean by government, of course, but government itself, it's really the scientists that are focused more on this exploration. So no, I don't think at this point that connection is distinct enough, or is obvious enough to make the link. But I think to people who are aware of the UFO issue, or have some relationship to it, some curiosity to it, even people like Michio Kaku, the physicist, who I've just been writing about on my Facebook page. I just heard him lecture a couple weeks ago. these kinds of people who are on the cutting edge of physics, they may be making that connection. I don't think it's so much government, though. I think it's more of the scientific community, and that they're really the important ones right now anyway.
Great point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I think you raise a good point. I notice in the media, often on a lot of the channels that I watch, often Discovery Channel, History Channel, etc., that there have been more and more documentary series. I know Dr. Kaku, who's a favorite of mine as well. I've read several of his books. He's come out with several documentary series, and I know that there's one that's called The Universe, and they tackle these things fairly head on, but they still, you can tell a lot of these scientists are hedging their bets. They say, well, the possibilities out there, and this, and of course you have to give them that. I mean, there's no definitive. There hasn't been any definitive studies like you've been requesting. So I think that I think we're moving towards that, and I think as a populace, at least here, people are becoming more and more sort of used to the thought that there's potentially life out there, intelligent life that may be visiting us or what have you.
I think you're right, and I hope we just keep learning more and more and making more discoveries about these planets that are out there. I find it extremely interesting, and I love to follow the the searches that are going on out there. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Let me ask you something that I believe you probably have had a chance to look into, but maybe haven't talked about a lot. What about other governments around the world, specifically the former Soviet Union and maybe China, some of the other countries that aren't, that we don't discuss, often? Have you found them to be very open? I mean, as a government, they've been fairly closed off for a number of years, but I'm just wondering if that's kind of pervasive around the world these days.
Yeah, I mean, the research that I've done has been really focusing on countries that actually have official agencies which study this phenomenon. And there are a number of countries out there that do. And those are the ones that I really looked into because I'm interested in what the official relationship is to this subject matter. I don't know a whole lot about China. I know that there's a lot of coverage in the Chinese media, and there are some scientific organizations in China that are involved with this. But I don't think they have any kind of official body that deals with it. But I find it fascinating, and it's something that I like to contrast with the United States when I'm talking about how other countries handle this. Just the fact that there are a significant number of countries, both in Europe and in South America, which have set up actual official government agencies that are tasked with investigating this phenomenon. And in my book, I talk a lot about the French agency, JPON, which has been around since the mid-'70s, which is part of their space agency, which would be like as if in the United States, within NASA, we had an office within NASA. Let's say I had 3 or 4 staff people who did nothing but investigate UFOs, and it was just considered part of the mandate of that government agency to do this. So that's how it is in France, and there are numerous countries in South America that have official agencies that are looking into this. And, of course, Belgium, we just talked about how Belgium got involved with it when they had their wave going on. Brazil, the Brazilian Air Force has been deeply involved with it for a long time. So it is really interesting to me to contrast the United States approach to this to other countries. And the officials that I've talked to from these other official agencies would very much like the United States to become more of a player on the world scene because they're all doing extremely hard work, each one within their own country. It's hard. There's not going to be the kind of opportunity to really break through the mystery of this, I think, unless the U.S. government gets more involved, unless the international scientific community gets involved, which should involve the United States. So, it's just very unfortunate. And I think what's really important, though, is that the South American countries are now starting to come together. And this is being initiated by the agency in Chile, which has been doing extraordinary work on this subject matter within their own country. And they're now reaching out to other countries within their region and forming alliances with them so that we may start to see an international network growing of official agencies that are investigating this phenomenon, and that will give the whole thing more power, because these countries are coming together, and eventually, hopefully, they might have some impact on the United States and might be part of the thing that will help facilitate change for us. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. There's a question from the chat line, I think, that has that sort of goes along with the discussion here. And it says, has anyone approached the U.S. government with regards to how the only positive response to the UFO issue has been from the authorities in other countries like the Belgium affair?
Well, when you say approach the U.S. government, of course, it's always a question of what do you mean by the U.S. government? You can approach individual people within that, and I have done so. I mean, certainly people are aware that John Podesta wrote the foreword to my book. He was President Clinton's former chief of staff, and he's also very influential within the Obama administration. He's not a government official, but he's extremely well connected and is a player and is a policymaker. And he's somebody who's taken a very supportive role towards the work that I'm doing and towards the whole coalition that I've been working with. So, yes, and I have certainly brought individuals such as him information about what is going on in other countries, and I do this when I meet with people at that level, and they take it very seriously. I think it seems to be a very important, one of the things that these people do pay attention to, let's put it that way, is the fact that other governments are officially involved with this. I mean, that is a very important point to bring to government officials in America. It has an impact on them. So I think if people want to approach their local officials or their newspapers or anybody that they want to impact about this, I think that's one really important way to do it, is to point that out. And, my book does include chapters written by the officials from these agencies around the world. So, they're given an opportunity to describe in their own words what they've learned being in this position and how their countries handle this issue and what they think about it after having spent 2 decades or more, working within the official world and investigating cases. So it is a very important fact to make known, and I don't think many people in America know that other countries have a completely different kind of relationship to this than we do here.
I agree. I think it goes without saying that in this case, I do believe that those folks over in the other countries and those government officials that are doing that kind of work will add to sort of a collective that potentially will finally get this subject the sort of the serious treatment that it deserves. But only time will tell, right? And
absolutely. Let's just, I take my hat off to South America right now, the countries there who are really trying to make that happen. So that's a very important development that's going on.
And I think, something else that we here in America tend to do, and that is we tend to be a little bit arrogant about, our attitudes towards the rest of the world, where, it's like, well, if it's not happening here, then it doesn't really count, but that obviously is not the case. And as you point out in several chapters with the folks that have written, that they, that this is going on, it's a worldwide phenomena, and they actually have, credible folks that are out there, that are doing this research.
Absolutely, such as generals. Generals head up these agencies. The one in Chile is headed up by a general, and he wrote a very interesting chapter in the book about it. So, you have to have great respect for these people.
Mm-hmm. Leslie, let me ask you a question, and we should have gotten to this a little bit earlier. Is there a website that you currently have, or how do folks go about ordering your book? I can't recommend it highly enough. I found it just very credible, very matter of fact, and enjoyable, very quick read as well. I just found it I couldn't put the book down. Where can people get it?
Well, thanks for saying that. There's nice things about it, James. I do have a website, which is really the book's website. The address is UFOsontherecord.com. So it's sort of an abbreviation of the title of the book, which is UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. So again, it's UFOsontherecord.com. And there is, if you want to order the book, there's a button right there on the homepage that you can use to just click on it, and it'll take you right to Amazon. Or you can just go to Amazon.com or any other website that sells books, and you can get it. And there's a hardcover edition of the book, and then last summer we came out with a paperback edition, if people prefer that, which is of course less expensive. So both editions are available. And I also am very active on Facebook. I have an open Facebook page. If you just go to Facebook and type in my name, and I love to hear from people there, and welcome anybody to come on and say whatever they want to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know we're running up against sort of getting towards the end of our little time here, but I wanted again to sort of wrap things up by discussing sort of the conclusions that you come to, and I find it just again a real spot on talking about the implications and going into some of the areas related to the real base human psyche, our religious, implications, societal implications, and that sort of thing. If we find out that we are in fact not alone, you want to just expand on that a little bit, kind of where your thoughts are there, and how you feel about things like that.
Okay, I mean, it's a really big question.
I know. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No. And I hope, the chapter, there's one chapter in my book which was written by two political scientists, which I was just blown away by their it's called Militant Agnosticism and the UFO Taboo. Just an absolutely fantastic treatment that they've given to the whole psychological implications and why governments are so afraid of the subject. So I hope people will read that. But basically, we were touching earlier on just sort of the psychological aversion. I mean, these two political scientists sort of equate it to denial within the field of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. There's so many reasons why we want to deny this and just not deal with it at all. And I think there's a lot of things that can be said about that. There's the whole question too of a scientific revolution, a paradigm shift, and work that's been done showing that anything that's really dramatically going to change our scientific paradigm takes a long time to bring about. And, the example, of course, is Copernicus, which took centuries for him to just get the acceptance that that the planets revolved around the sun. So, you can see very much the parallels. If indeed we are dealing with something here that has an extraterrestrial source or some kind of interdimensional source is another possibility. It dramatically changes our scientific paradigm, and that's something that is a hard thing to overcome, and it's something that it represents a lot of big ideas and big events and big psychological hurdles that are really interesting to think about. And I really think the bottom line, though, that the bottom line conclusion of this book is really, number one, that there is definitely a real phenomenon here. It's a physical phenomenon, and it exists. There's no question about it. Number two, therefore, we need to find out what it is. We need to learn more about it. And the only way to do that is for our scientific community to get involved in a big way, which means an international investigation, a coordinated investigation where they're actually given resources to do the job and where they become proactive and excited about discovering what this thing is all about. And that's what I really hope we will get someday. And maybe, as we move towards the discovery of life in other planets, as we were discussing about earlier, maybe that will open some kind of a door for scientists to become more interested in this. But that's really, I think, what we need to have. That's the next step that we need we need more understanding of the fact that it exists, and there's no way around that. And then we need scientists to become involved, and the only way that can happen, in my opinion, in the United States anyway, is for our government to shift its position. And I do discuss in the book, put forward an idea for how we might set up some kind of a very small structure within the United States government, a very small office that could take on this subject matter. And that's something I've been working on. That's one of my goals now that the book is done, really, is to keep working on that particular issue. And it's something I've been working on behind the scenes quite a bit. So,
if you ever get a petition that needs to be signed, I'm sure that there's probably many of us that are listening now that would be happy to sign that as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's the way to go with this issue, at least the way it is right now, because I've discovered from meetings I've had with people that are in a position to affect policy and, have some kind of significant position within the status quo, that they don't want the public association with this. So any kind of a petition that involves a kind of a public effort on this right now is not something that they're interested in. They'd much rather kind of quietly have some meetings and quietly maybe try to make some things happen behind the scenes and not be publicly associated with it. Nobody in politics wants to be associated with this issue for obvious reasons. So, these kind of public petitions and the people that are out there, claiming that there's a cover up and we've got to accuse the government of doing these horrible things, and it just isn't effective policy. It's not a strategically sound way to try to bring about change. And I actually wrote a piece about that for the Huffington Post. If anybody's interested in learning more about what these government officials have told me about how the best way is to approach this subject. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really important question. I think a lot of people don't really understand how the actual people in positions of authority like to have this thing approached. And I tried to offer that on the Huffington Post in response to all these petitions that were going up on the We the People website, which I felt were completely counterproductive to what we need to have happen. So that's a debate that's of interest to me, and I do have a piece about that people can read more about what I think about it.
Okay, can they find that out on your your Facebook page or on the website?
I post it again. There's a link to it on the Huffington. It was on the Huffington Post, but I'll post a link to that again on my Facebook page. Why not? I'm always happy for people to read it again. So it sort of takes what I've written in my book a step further and offers some opinions of some of the people in positions of authority that are really offering their advice to the general public about how to best approach the status quo about the UFO subject. And that's something I've learned over a period of years from working in the way I do. I've learned, what are things you can say and what are things you can't say. If you want to listen to what strategically makes sense. And that's really, and my book sort of encapsulates that, in that it's presenting the subject in a way that it makes it accessible to people in that kind of position. And there's certain kinds of information that they are not going to be able to relate to, and you just don't present them with that. You have to be careful about what you present them with. Sure.
Well, Leslie, listen, this hour and a half has gone by incredibly quick. I want to thank you so very much for joining us tonight. We are certainly appreciative of the time, and I would encourage everyone that's listening tonight, if you don't have her book, it's a very great read, a very well done book, and it's a great read to to sit by and read. So thank you so much for doing that and coming on with us.
Oh, James, you're so welcome. I've enjoyed it very much.
Well, this brings us to the conclusion. I want to thank everybody for participating tonight. I'm James Shatley for Epic Voyages. Be sure to tune in next Monday evening at 8 p.m. Central, right here on Inception Radio Network, where our host will be Nick Redfern with his guest Lyle Blackburn, author of The Beast of Boggy Creek, the Fouke, Arkansas Monster. Thanks again, Leslie, and good night to all, and stay curious.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up is fine. The